a resolution from the town council that was passed on January 19th, 2021. Our vice chairman and I thought that it would be good for everyone just to review that one more time, understand what we are tasked with doing. I believe, you know, in the short of it, as a committee, we will be providing recommendations and a report to the town council for the town council to then act on. And then there's a little bit more of the finer points of the details of master planning and whatnot within that that resolution. But I just wanted to make sure that everyone was kind of clear and set on what we are tasked with and moving forward with. So if anybody has any questions or comments, please feel free to speak up.
I have a question. So on page 2 of this, the second paragraph, item C.
You just got to lean into it a little bit.
Second page, second paragraph, item C. Review all existing public facilities improvement plans as accepted by the town council. So that doesn't seem to indicate that the scope of that is limited to Halliwell. I'm curious if we have any clarification around that. Like, should we be looking at the other projects that are going on and how they might relate to what we'll be advising them on in Halliwell?
So how I look at that is, sorry, there's a little, sorry about that. How I'm reading that is that we're looking at all the buildings within town. If there are other buildings such as, you know, right across the street from us over here with Heritage Hall or the Old Town Hall, if there are things going on with that, we should at least be well aware of the programming that's going on there, so that in that instance, we're not duplicating efforts. I know the Heritage Association has been taking control of those properties, so maybe it would be worth just having a conversation with the Heritage Association to make sure that we're not duplicating any of their efforts, because I know at some point they were going to be looking for public input to potentially see what they might have town hall offer as well.
Yeah, I think that reading of it makes sense, and you know, I think that they would be one of the groups that we'll probably talk about later. We'll talk about, you know, how to engage various stakeholders in the community. So I think that's probably the way to kind of read that. Thanks.
Yep. Are there any other thoughts, questions, comments on that? Pretty straightforward. Okay. It is certainly a big task, so thank you all for being here to help out with it. I'm switching back and forth between screens, I'm sorry. So for item number 4 on the agenda, it's for discussion, consideration, and action, the Weston and Sampson contract. What I've listed there is recommendations and letter to town council for approval. So I know we talked at length about the contract at the last meeting. We had some clarification questions. We spoke about potentially phasing certain aspects of the contract as we move forward. And we didn't really have a full vote to move forward on it. So what I'm looking for tonight is the ability for us to vote and recommend to the town council that we sign the contract so we can get Weston and Sampson to move forward, get the assessments going, get the surveys going, because that's really going to be a cornerstone for us to do a lot of our work. And without those assessments and surveys, I think we're going to be spinning our tires before we even get started. So does anybody else have questions or comments about the Weston and Sampson contract? Yes, Mr. Gardner. Yep.
Okay, we got it. Thank you, Bob. Yeah, we did discuss some modifications to it. Should we consider making any changes to it before or modifications that we would recommend before we ask the council to vote to approve, or do we send it to them and let them determine exactly if the scope of work is going to stay as written, or if there's anything that's going to be added or taken out? I'm just curious as to whether or not we should discuss making any modifications to it before we vote to approve.
Yep. So my understanding in speaking with the administrator about the contract is that if we decide to modify the scope of work, that would likely put us out to have to rebid the project and redo the RFP process. So I know Tom Mr. Kravitz has reviewed all of the applications that have come forth for the previous RFQ that got sent out. I have full faith in him in his review of it. So just to keep things moving, I would say we leave it as is, because I personally think that the scope of work is outlined quite well, and would like to get them moving. I did have an email exchange with one of the representatives from Weston and Sampson, and I was going to get to this a little later in our timeline discussion, but she was saying that the survey portion of the scope of work would take approximately a month to do. The assessment would take the assessment of all the buildings, the entire property would take about 2 months. So my personal thought is that we move forward with that scope of work, and if we can work with them in their current contract as it's outlined, and hit all those things very easily. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? It seems like a big portion of what they're going to do is complete an assessment of the existing, not only the site, but the structures. Yeah. Right. Yep. And I'm just curious how much of this total cost is of the structure assessment, when ultimately I think we all know the answer of what the assessment of the structure is. And I understand that point. I also think that we need to do some due diligence to make sure that if we're going to be proposing new buildings, but reusing some of them, we need to know the order of magnitude of, how much things are going to be costing. If we're going to be demoing them, are we going to be renovating them for immediate reuse? If we're going to be having to worry about hazmat issues. So I know at the last meeting we spoke about, assessing a few of the buildings, but I think it would be doing a disservice if we don't identify and review every building that's there, because we may find that, building 1 might be in the best shape of all 11 of the buildings, and if I don't want to be recommending using certain buildings if they're not going to be usable, but if we're thinking that right now, building 11, the one that's closest to the parking lot, is, a potential area for reuse. We want to make sure that that one's okay. So I think it just understanding that what shape each building is in will likely be helpful. But didn't the school committee do that prior to the closure of Halliwell? Wasn't that one of the main reasons why we had to add on to NSCS? I believe the main reason why we had to add on to NSCS was to accommodate the displaced grades. I don't think it had anything to do with, the addition was because the Halliwell was closed. I don't think they had a full assessment done. They had an assessment done in 2014, but they haven't, since then, they haven't had a full assessment of the buildings yet.
I just want to add to that. So I think that I think with the buildings, I think that the town and the school looked at what it would take to continue to have the buildings in not only working order, but up to code. And when we looked at the dollar amount of what it would take to not only bring it up to code, but maintain that code, it far outweighed, what we were trying to accomplish. And from a financial standpoint, I think that the school and the town just decided that if we have the room between the middle school and the elementary school to be able to modify something with those dollars that may or may not cost the same or less than bringing Halliwell up to code, I think they felt more comfortable with doing that because the overall structure of both of those buildings were more adequate than Halliwell itself. Now, as far as the proposal, I think that if the committee were to recommend to the council to move forward and to sign the proposal, I think everything that's in the scope, we then as a committee can decide in what order, to some degree, we want them to go in, which I think makes sense. So we can recommend, or, for lack of better words, dictate a timeline to Weston and Sampson within the timeline they're giving us. Do I think that, it would be appropriate to get a breakdown of costs within the already proposed dollar amount? Probably not. Because again, they've already priced it based on the overall scope with, not only them, but two other engineering firms. So I think really the main consideration here is do we approve the scope of the work as is, or do we not? As far as recommending.
Jeff, if I may, I don't have the raise hand feature, I think, because I'm a co-host. The other thing to keep in mind too is as you're going through the work, when the contractor is invoicing the town, there's certainly going to be a percentage complete by task. You're going to get a sense of what you're spending. You know what I mean? And you can make decisions on what to do next, based on that.
Yeah, and I know in my experience, if we ask that a consultant to structure an invoice in such a way, they're pretty amenable to doing it. I know my company does that sometimes when we need to have breakouts of things so committees know how much things are costing. I certainly think we can ask that of Weston and Sampson.
I guess one question. Who is their contact person? Who do they report to on what they're doing? Who is the person in town here that directs their actions or communicates to them on their actions?
It would be this committee. This committee in conjunction with Tom.
All right.
So
you would be the contact person when they decide, well, should we evaluate building 7 and 8 or something else? They would be contacting you before they go forward with any action.
Well, in my understanding of when they do the assessments, they're going to spend 2 days down at the site to walk every building. So if I needed to be down there, I would make sure that I would make myself available. If Tom and I hate to pile on you, Tom, but if I'm not available and you need a representative from town, we could request that Mr. Kravitz do it. If somebody else from this committee is available to walk the property with them, I would certainly say every one of you is more than welcome to certainly to participate in that process too.
Thank you.
And then I would also add that I would probably even ask Mr. Pendergast to potentially participate in that walkthrough, because sometimes DPW maintenance staff have better ideas of what has gone on with these buildings. They can give a little bit more history to them. I know the school department has Alan Seepy, the facilities director there. He may know some things of the history of the building. I can't recall when he was brought on, but you may have an idea of when some of that maintenance had taken place as well. So we want to make sure that everyone that knows about the standing facilities at the property should probably be talked to or present at that walkthrough.
So, you know, one of the important things we talked about last time was asking them to attach some milestone dates to some of these things. So what you're saying is that asking them to do that is actually changing scope.
Not necessarily provide, when I had asked about scope items 2.11, the survey and the assessments, I think it's 2.11, 2.12, and 2.13. They had given me generic times because a lot of it's going to be dependent on when we sign their contract. So if we were to get town council approval to sign their contract this Monday, then they could likely have a week or two of mobilization, and then they're off to the races doing their stuff. So in a condition of approval of the contract, I would say to the town council is to ask Weston and Sampson for approximate times of each task. Then that way we know as a committee, okay, it's going to take them the month to do the survey, the 2 months to do the assessment. If they're going to start working on the pro forma, that's going to take another 2 months. You know, there's going to be the community input session. They have outlined is 2 hours. We can identify when that happens. So I think there's a lot of things that we can request of Weston and Sampson once we get them started.
So that was, you kind of covered my follow-up question, which was, did you get a sense from them of how quickly they'd be able to start once the contract is signed? Because we have to submit, you know, our recommendation to council. Council has to, you know, get in the agenda and meet, then get it to them. Like you said, there's, you know, a week or two of mobilization. And then from that point on, we're looking at 1 month of survey, 2 months of assessment. So I'm just trying to kind of, you know, understand where that puts us potentially, how far down the road.
Yeah. Well, part of our agenda later is going to be discussing some certain milestones that we want to make sure that we hit. One of the thoughts was that, just what I said, is asking Weston and Sampson for an understanding of how long each task would take. And then that way we can figure out our schedule and direct them a little bit more easily because, you know, as an architect, I like to work better with deadlines. I'm sure they work better with deadlines as opposed to just having an open-ended date. So once that gets moving, we'll be able to really definitively say, you know, this is going to be happen this day. This is going to happen one day. Why is it going to happen another day? So I think there's the opportunity to have that done. Are there any other questions, comments, thoughts? Okay, so then I would guess I would be looking for a motion to approve the Weston and Sampson contract as it stands, and move that forward.
I'll make a motion.
Okay.
To move this forward. I'll make a motion to approve this agreement with Weston and Sampson and move it forward for approval with the town council.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a second. Now, I'm not sure as far as roll call votes go for this sort of situation, but I'm going to do a roll call vote on this one. So, Mr. Gertman.
Yes.
Mr. Mayo.
Yes.
Mr. Halliwell.
Yes.
Mr. Bradford.
Yes.
Mr. Ford.
Yes.
Mr. Savini.
Yes.
Mr. Simpkins.
Yes.
And the chairman votes yes. And then I'm just for semantics, I am gonna ask for approval from this committee to kind of letter to town council recommending this contract. So do I have a motion for that? Okay, we have a motion, Mr. Mann, we have a second. Mr. Gertman, all right. Roll call vote, Mr. Gertman? Yes. Mr. Mayo? Yes. Mr. Halliwell? Yes. Mr. Bradford?
Yes.
Mr. Corvo?
Yes.
Mr. Savini?
Yes.
And Mr. Simpkins?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. So we are on to topic number 5. for discussion, consideration, and action, immediate use for the community garden. I wanted to put this on the agenda for this evening. I know Mr. Bradford brought this up at the last meeting, that we look at getting a community garden started down at the Halliwell property. I also received a phone call from Mrs. Ann Lilly, and she had informed me, she's on the Parks and Rec board, and she has informed me that the Parks and Rec has a plan for a community garden. So I see Mrs. Lilly is on. Mrs. Lilly, do you want to explain your plan a little bit?
Sure, now that I'm unmuted. We had actually had this proposal on since last year, but we thought we could move it forward this year. So basically, it's a temporary garden. It is using wire fencing with T-posts and has 4x4 lumber for the corner of each and at each gate. And we were thinking of having it run by volunteers, with the vegetables going to the food pantry on the last 2 weeks of the month, and the volunteers splitting the produce on the first 2 weeks of the month. I've written out a plan with costing. It's about $900 for costing. There are no raised beds. The beds are made by putting cardboard down on the sod and layering with compost and composted cow manure and shredded leaves and planting directly in that. So that at a future date, if we decide we want to remove it or put it some other place, it should be fairly easy to disassemble, rake it down, reseed it. But we thought it would be a great starting point for community building. A good start for finding some use at Halliwell and getting some kind of presence down there, and just be a good thing for our town.
Great, thank you. Does anybody have any more questions for Mrs. Lilly?
Mrs. Lilly, thank you for taking the time to talk to us about this. I actually think it's a great idea. I just had 2 questions. Do you know roughly the dimensions of what you're thinking and scope of the community garden?
Yes, so we're looking at about 30 feet by 50 feet. Kate and I walked around Halliwell, and we thought the best location would be between the cafetorium and the administration building, just because there was water available at that site. It is shaded part of the day. There's some pine trees up back by the hill that shade it early in the day, but we could probably work with that. The way it would be situated, it would be about, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 feet away from the cafetorium. So it's possible, depending on how we think about it, we could use the side of the cafetorium as one side of it if we were allowed to bolt the fencing onto 2x4s directly to the building, but we don't have to do that. I just thought it might make it easier to weed whack between the fence and the building if there was no alleyway there. We would have 2 gates because we would access from the parking lot with 1 gate, but we would be getting deliveries of compost in that from the back because the driveway swings around the back and we can't get a truck up through that walkway. So we'd have to have 2 gates instead of just 1.
Okay, I just have one other question. So obviously with the community garden, you know, I've gone to them before, and again, I think they're fantastic. However, even though it's a community garden where it's volunteers that are maintaining it, weeding, making sure that it gets, you know, proper irrigation, harvesting and whatnot, just really maintaining it, who is going to be who's going to be monitoring that cycle of workers or volunteer workers? I guess what's going to prevent a situation where nobody's there to maintain it or to harvest or to weed?
The Parks and Rec Commission has a pretty big agenda of things we want to get done. So we've discussed we're going to be breaking into subcommittees. There will be a community garden subcommittee. Myself and Cheryl Marandola, who is the chair of the Parks and Rec Commission, will be overseeing the subcommittee. I'm fairly confident we will get a lot of volunteers. I have several neighbors in Forestdale that are already on board with this. So I'm fairly confident. One of the reasons why I wanted to make it temporary is because sometimes these things do ebb and flow, interest falls off. But I'm pretty confident that this year we'll be able to carry forth and make sure that, you know, by September, October, it's cleaned up and put to bed. I don't know if there's anything else I can tell you, unless you're volunteering.
I'm sure I'll be down there often. I guess just one last kind of interest question for me. The garden itself, are you going to focus on one particular season, or is it something that you're looking to have maintained where it's kind of rotating crops throughout the growing season, depending on whatever you're doing? And again, that's just for my own edification.
I think we're going to be doing a lot of succession planting. Our goal is to produce as many pounds of food as possible. I've already spoken to the minister at the Congregational Church about the food pantry, and she says they serve about 60 families. I was unaware that the need was that great in our community. So if we want to provide decent produce for 60 families every month, we're going to have to crank out some serious produce. Maybe we'll just do zucchini, I don't know. But I think we're going to try, and me and Cheryl are really into gardening. We've started all the plants. We have hundreds of peppers and tomato plants already started. So I think we're going to be good.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Gardner.
Thank you.
But I'm hoping that your committee will put your endorsement on this so we can move this forward to the town council.
So I just want to preface my remarks by saying I'm very familiar with the concept of the public garden. Certainly, when I served as chairman of the Parks and Rec Commission, I actually brought the concept to the council about 2 years ago and recommended that the council look at the Halliwell site just after the school department basically turned it over to the town to look at the potential of putting garden there. So I'm a big proponent of the concept. That said, I do have some concerns in relation to moving forward with basically doing anything at the site until we as a group have the opportunity to actually get over there and see what's going on over there, see exactly what we have, take a tour, if you will, of the facilities, the structures. It's all kind of conceptual I have all the faith in the world in Ann and Cheryl's abilities to manage this process, but to conceptualize exactly what they need without physically, I mean, I've walked it myself. I haven't walked it as part of this group, and to know exactly where it's going to be situated, where the water feed is coming from, who's providing the water, who's paying for the water, who's paying for the structure, the fencing, do we need security on site, is who gets to use it. It's a Smithfield community garden, but exactly how do we decide who gets to use it? Is there a lottery that's held? Do we sell lots? I mean, there's a lot of questions, I think, over and above the immediate one I have, which is physically walking the site and determining exactly where we're at to get a baseline of what we have. So Again, I've been a proponent of this for a couple of years. I personally would struggle with voting to send something forward to the council and putting my name on it without knowing exactly what we have.
If I could ask Mrs. Lilly for clarification around something that Mr. Gurton said. So these are not segregated lots that you're talking about. This is one basically big lot that everybody is going to kind of jointly manage, and then the produce is going to be divvied up equally among all the volunteers. Is that right?
That's correct. We had thought about the individual plots, but we thought for the first year, we would just do it cooperatively. And also we thought that would make it the more productive instead of having everyone having one zucchini plant in their plot, that we could be more productive and efficient by just kind of working it communally. And again, this is kind of an experiment to see how things work and how the community responds to it. You know, it could be in future years, we could change the dynamic. We could rent plots out. This is kind of an experiment. It's kind of a leap of faith to see if our community is ready to do this. Ray at the Department of Public Works feels that he can cover the cost out of his budget. Again, it's about $900. We will be able to use the town would be paying for the water since it's coming through it's coming through a spigot off the side of one of the buildings. Other than that, I think most of the other things, odds and ends, will be donated by volunteers. And I'd be happy to go out and walk around with anyone. You know, maybe you guys have a better location. But our choice was basically based upon the access to the water.
I have a question regarding volunteers. How would you solicit folks to volunteer?
The volunteers will be solicited from the community. We want to have the subcommittee, so people who want to serve on the subcommittee, but also people just willing to put in some hours every week. We figured we might have some captains so that there might be people who work during the day and might only be able to stop by in the evenings. There might be people who can only stop by on weekends, or there might be, retired folks or people who are not working who can do it during the week. We will probably keep in contact with phones and text messages and maybe a whiteboard I have one, if we can secure it somewhere so we can write notes to each other. We'll just have a crew of volunteers.
I guess I clarify. How are we going to get the volunteers to make sure that everybody has opportunity to volunteer if they want to? Is it going to be on the town website saying, hey, this is the hours and times, and how is that logistically going to work?
Well, I think the Parks and Rec Commission, Chase Fuller is going to be doing the outreach for all of our subcommittees. So we're going to use the Valley Breeze, Northern Rhode Island Now, the town newsletter, and if possible, the town website to solicit and ask for people to contact us to be volunteers for any of those other groups.
Thank you.
And I just have one last question. So I don't know if I said that last time, but this is, I think it's great that the questions that are being asked. I also think it's great that you've taken the time to think through a lot of this stuff. And I guess the good thing is this committee meets every 2 weeks or twice a month rather. I think it would benefit what you're trying to do if you could put together something, and it doesn't have to be very elaborate, but something like a plan design, going over all of these questions, inquiries, and providing, backup support and answers to that, so that, possibly, see, because if if we were to take action on this now and recommend it yea or nay to the town council, more than likely, they're gonna come back and ask this committee those same questions. And so rather than running the risk of it not going, as we all would like with the town council, I think it would make sense if maybe we could get all of these questions from the community garden group or organization in more of like a Word document that we can review maybe the next committee meeting.
I'd be glad to supply that document, and if you would like to maybe start your meeting next time down at Halliwell, where we could spend 15, 20 minutes walking before you go on to the rest of your meeting, I'd be happy to do that as well.
So I'll address. I just want to do a share screen for 1 second and show everybody where Mrs. Lilly is referring to. Okay. So to orient everybody, the driving circle is right here. The cafetorium is here. The administration building is here. This area outlined in red is where Mrs. Lilly is referring to, between the administration, building 6 and building 10. And the nice thing is that, as she said, there is water access right here on the back of the building. If people can see that that's blue. Each building actually has a spigot on the back side. So there's actually, on building 7, there's one in this area. On building 8, there's one down here. They're adjacent to the restrooms that are in the buildings. And I had gone down at Halliwell for a walk last week. And just thinking about locations for community gardens I was even thinking that in this courtyard would be a well-protected area for, keep the deer, keep the rabbits away a little bit. But this might be an also good area for a community garden, as well as this little courtyard out here, just because of the water access from both buildings. But yes, I agree with everything that's been said tonight, and it would probably be beneficial to at least individually go down and take a site walk. The issue with site walks as they stand right now is that if we all decide to have a site walk, that's going to constitute an open meeting. So, and that needs to be publicly advertised, and it also needs to allow to have public access to it. And for sometimes, especially right now, people are still uncomfortable going out for site walks and everything. We've had an issue like this with planning boards. So perhaps what I will ask is that each individual member of the board, now that we've kind of oriented everybody, maybe take an hour, take a half hour on sometime in the next couple of weeks, just go and walk the property by yourself. I understand the questions about security. I know that they have a security system down there existing. I would probably want to defer to the police chief or the town administrator to see how often those cameras are looked at. That would be one of my concerns with security as well. Because I know I don't believe it's a live feed to the police station where, the dispatcher can watch to see who's coming and going and get some of the officers down there to make sure there's no mischief going on. So, yes.
Okay, the only other thing I would like to add is I have heard from DPW that only one of those spigots is working, that all the water has been shut off except to 1 or 2 buildings.
Okay.
So that would be something we'd also have to double check on.
Yep.
So I have to imagine the answer to this is no, but is there any concern about this interfering with the engineering work?
No. We're not doing any geotechnical engineering and drilling any holes or anything like that. There is one drainage grate that's kind of in the corner up here. We're not doing any exploratory demolitions to understand what's going on underneath these structures. So I would think that an activity like this would be a very minimal impact to the surveys and the assessments that are going on. Yes, Mr. Gardner.
Yeah, just to reiterate, all the confidence in Ann's abilities and showing our dollars, but I agree with what Mr. Carver had to say. I'd like to see an outline, I'd see a plan. Where it's April 15th, right? It's not like we're getting too late into the growing season that we would need to do this immediately.
Mhm.
So if we can't schedule a public walkthrough of the facility at the site, I would hope we could, but if that's not going to be feasible, and individually we can review at least the exterior and get an idea, and maybe Jeff, you could, if they can get an outline to prior, we can peruse it and get an idea of what the plan is. I would absolutely love to support it, but a little more details I think would personally help me.
That would be fine. I also have to tell you that on our checklist of things to do for the garden is also to do a dig safe survey, because I do not want to put any posts in and hit something. I don't know what's in there. So, and the process of using these layered beds means that we don't have to do any soil testing, and we don't have to be concerned with anything that might be in the soil like lead or something. So those are concerns that I've already thought about. But I will provide you with the documents, and I'll send it to Jeff, and he can attach it to the open meetings and everything you have to share ahead of time. How does that sound?
Sounds wonderful. Does anybody else have any other questions? Yes.
I'd just like to say, I think it's a very worthwhile project. It would make me a little more comfortable in supporting it, and if I know that you and Cheryl, as being members of the Recreation Advisory Committee and now one of the Community Garden Subcommittee, if we can know that the two of you will take the lead on it, as far as, at least in this first year, to know if there's anything going on with it, there's at least somebody that we can point to from the town, appointed to a committee that will oversee it, make sure that it's in good running order, that it's well maintained. So if you can make sure that it would make me feel better when you put your proposal together for us or the town council, that maybe that's highlighted as well.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds reasonable.
Great. Are there any other comments or questions? So then I'll make note that we're going to continue this item to our next meeting, which I believe is going to be, I can tell you right off the bat. So we've decided the Halliwell Review Committee is going to be meeting on the first and third Thursdays of each month. So that will put us on for May 6th.
Thank you.
Very welcome. Thank you. Okay, next on the agenda for discussion, consideration, and action, the immediate use of the property for seniors and the food pantry. Let me jump back to my notes here, sorry. So for this one, it was more of to begin the discussion of what amenities are going to be required down at a future seniors, the space for senior center, and what amenities may be required for a food pantry. There were a couple different things that I want to make sure that we include some folks from the town departments. I want to ask Kerry Anderson, the building inspector, to come and take a look to see if they're, especially for the cafetorium area, to see if he finds that those are up to code enough to give us like a temporary certificate of occupancy. I don't know if those have been revoked. I don't know what standing those are in, but if we're going to be having people in there, I want to make sure with our building inspector that we're not putting ourselves at risk for anything not being in compliance. And then also look at, reach out to the fire chief, because although they'll have some things to say for safety wise as well. And kind of just get sign-offs from both of those departments to make sure that they are comfortable with using those facilities in the interim of how, as along while we're figuring out what to do with that property. And Mr. Corvo, I know you also had some other things to say about the senior center too. Yeah, you had to. You've had some other conversations that I want to make sure. Thank you.
Yeah, so we had, we had the fire chief go over to Halliwell to inspect the cafetorium. And he had stated that that looked, it appeared to be good. He, for lack of better words, I guess gave it his blessing. One of the things that that I did reach out to Parks and Rec on, or DPW rather, Ray, is I asked him to try and get the reinspection done on the fire alarms. The certification has not expired yet, but it does expire at the end of April. So I asked him to look into that reinspection sooner rather than later. Okay, where we are creeping in on the 15th of the month. He said he was going to look into it. I also wanted to make sure that if it's needed, that there's adequate temperature regulation in the building. And they came back and said that there is working heat there. I guess the next question would be, to make sure that if it's propane, is there enough in the propane tank? So, I mean, those are things that we'll need to make sure that that's available for that. And then I was also reached out by the senior committee today, stating that that they are looking, they're very eager to get in there to use it as an exercising facility for the seniors. So, these are things that obviously we want to make sure that structure-wise and anything that needs to be done on the forefront to make sure that it's 110% adequate and safe and comfortable for people to use, especially the seniors. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Does anybody else have any comments?
I would just reiterate that, a couple years ago, we stopped using these facilities because they weren't adequate to house kids. And, we're talking about going back in there and using them again when we haven't, done a thorough review. And it's good to hear that, that the fire chief is going in and looking at it, and, we're kind of doing the due diligence here. And I would just reiterate that I hope that, we can be really thorough in that before we invite people to go and use the facilities or, consider storing food there. Pretty sure that we all heard stories about animals running through the buildings, while kids were in class. So just want to make sure that, everything's up to snuff if we're going to have people use these things.
I was talking to you earlier about the food pantry.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Reverend Morris, who's on the head of the committee for food pantry, would like to take a look at that along with some other board members to just probably, I believe, in the big plan, if it worked, it would be building 11, I guess, possibly one of those classrooms potentially would be a good location for the pantry. And I wondered how we might be able to get access to that, and whether it's okay for people to go in and just walk around and see if it would suit their needs. And keys to get in, basically, is what I'm saying. And would it be okay for people to go in, or is that a hazard to even go in? I'm not sure.
Yeah, and again, I think that's going back to have, getting Kerry Anderson to take a look as a building inspector to make sure that he's not seeing anything that's going to be a liability for the town. To be honest, I have no idea who has the keys to the building. I would assume that it's DPW. I know I don't have the keys, but I can coordinate with the town administrator to see who does have the keys, and walk with Reverend Eileen to take a look at, see what's down there, and in addition to all the other folks that we're going to have walking through.
I think they'd like to look at one of those classrooms and to see how they have to organize it to, for the pantry to go in. If we decide to allow them to put a pantry in there.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Red.
So I think, like everybody's comments there, coming up with a minimum list of what we would like to have see done before we let people inside the building. I think that'd be a good idea, just so we can get started on this thing right away.
Mr. Chair, sorry to interrupt with unrelated material, but I actually have to leave early tonight, so I'm going to get my vaccine. So good luck with the rest of the motion.
Thank you.
Jeff, I
I heard hydrate.
Harris had a question.
When you get the shot. I heard hydrate a lot after you get the shot. Yes, Tom.
I think Jeff Harris had his hand up.
Okay. Mr. Harris.
I do, gentlemen, if it's inappropriate for the public to come forward at this time, I will wait until it's an appropriate time. But speaking on the senior center and the community garden, I had some thoughts on that. I just wanted to add to that. If you want to wait until, I don't know what the agenda here is or what it spells out, and I don't want to overstep any boundaries here. So just let me know when or how you want me to respond.
No, Mr. Harris, if you have something to say in relation to the topic at hand, we can be more than happy to hear it.
Okay.
If there's going to be, if it's just general comments, then we're going to probably save that till a little later.
It kind of is general comments, but it is specific to the senior center that you're talking about, and as well as the community garden. So I can hold off, or you let me know.
You know, until we have a more structured way of things, I'll let you go ahead.
Okay, so I agree with Mr. Girton that on the community garden, that it's a noble cause. And I agree with everything that Miss Lilly is trying to present here. Just presenting my point of view in a way is, if you guys want to go about doing something like that, then as Mr. Girton expressed, put the plan together for you to review, that you know exactly what the stipulations are and how it's going to perform, so you don't have any questions about it. Then you can have the questions about it once the plan is put forward. So you have all the questions answered, then you can make an informed decision. That's all I have to say about the community garden. As far as the senior center, and you were talking about Weston and Sampson earlier, I think you should probably try to organize this as making the senior center your priority. Weston and Sampson should be their number one priority, is to address the senior center, make some decisions about how you want to make the senior center to what is required right now, as you mentioned, Jeff, Mr. Porter, about bringing the building inspector in to decide what you want to do in terms of what is good and what is not good, to make sure that the building is in good enough shape for the things that want to be performed there. And then put together a plan and have Weston and Sampson review that immediately and make that the #1 priority, because I think we can all agree here that one of the main things that we want to try to accomplish here is that I think a majority, an overwhelming majority, would like to see that building made as a senior center, not just as a senior center, as a multi-purpose, multi-use building that we can use as a community, and it'll bring activity down at that area and resolve some of the security concerns. All the other buildings can be addressed after that. Those are not high priority issues, but if we want to bring something to this and make it a priority to bring the activity down to that center, and that we could all probably agree on, is to have that building as a multi-use, multi-purpose center, priority for the seniors, and everything else gets scheduled behind, and upgrade that to what it needs to be and take care of that situation first. That's my input as far as I have right now. Thank you for letting me the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Yes, Mr. Gerton.
Similarly to, as I mentioned with the community garden, it'd be great to have input from the groups that would integrate with this, specifically like the seniors. What would they give us a outline of what they might want to be using it for, what kind of programs they would plan. The food pantry, if they determine that they would like to use the facility, what would they require? Basics down, and as was discussed, the structure, what kind of shape it's in, fire protection, rodents, right? They have to make sure that there are no rodents living in there, and as well, do we need a service to come in on a regular basis and treat it for rodent infestation? So I think there's a lot of things a lot of checklists that should be developed and make sure we go through prior to moving forward with approving any uses for any of these facilities. And I think, as Mr. Harris just said, Weston and Sampson can really help guide us with that. I mean, we're paying them. That's what we should be looking to them for.
Yep. Yes, Mr. Gerton.
So we can have Weston and Sampson do a building inspection for us, and they'll give for that one building now.
Yeah, what my thinking was is that we could prioritize the buildings that we want assessed first. What they could do in turn is then give us a draft. It doesn't have to be a final report, it's just a draft report of those buildings, and to be incorporated into the final draft. But then we can at least get the wheels in motion for all of these activities that can happen as we've been discussing this evening.
Well, I guess what I mean, would their report be sufficient enough to get
I think that would probably have to be a conversation with the building inspector to see what he'd be looking for, what updates we might need to do. I don't know, like one of the examples that I can think of is the restrooms. Are they ADA accessible? They have the grab bars, they have the clearances for wheelchair turning radius, that sort of thing. So that we can look at that as with the building inspector. I can look at that and kind of identify some things as well. And then that way we can get to work on those immediately. So then that way the buildings are ADA accessible. They are, they do have heat working in them. And then that way, it's just a conversation that we have to have, kind of get the thumbs up from everybody for the appropriate authorities. Yes.
Just for clarification for me, immediate use for seniors and food pantry, were there specific buildings that were being thought of being used immediately? Was building 11, building 10, or is it more of a wait and see after an assessment of the property?
No, I'll pop up the screen share again. So in everybody's mind that has been talking as of recent, it's really going to be, Building 10 would be likely be that multi-purpose senior exercising, senior area. And ideally, especially now with some pandemic stuff, I know the food pantry has curbside pickup. If you guys have been down here, because I live across the street over here, it gets backed up pretty quickly. So I think building I-11 would be ideal because that's the closest one for people. There's a ginormous parking lot that people can go around. There's a turnaround, there's ramps that people can kind of wheel in and wheel out. So ideally, building 11 would be the best place for it. Now, alternatively, maybe it becomes building 8 because they have the side door here and they can access the roundabout. Maybe even some of the space inside the cafeteria becomes part of the food pantry for temporary use. There's a fairly large classroom back here. There's also a lot of, when I was there way back when, this was the kitchen. So there may be hookups for appropriate refrigeration and whatnot. So that's again, one of those things where when we want to identify using a space as such, we need to make sure that we have the appropriate folks going in to make sure that, someone like Reverend Eileen can come in and say, well, and the food pantry committee can come in and say, okay, this is more than enough space for us to put what we have, or no, we need a bigger space. So I think it's one of those explorations that we really have to kind of look at. And we can also look at comparatively, do some square footage analysis too. We know how much space they have at the church as it stands. We can look at it at that dynamic as well. And I just want to put a disclaimer note on the agenda. When I have, for discussion, consideration, and action, that by no means means that I'm expecting immediate action to be taken tonight. I want to make sure we have a full vetted discussion. We're thoroughly considering everything. And then if at that point we have our recommendation to make the town council, at that point we will make our recommendation. I'm not trying to force anybody's hand to say we need to make a decision right now, because this is going to be a very, very long process of figuring out immediate uses, and it's going to be an even longer process to figure out this future use. So I just want to put that disclaimer out there. I'm not trying to force anybody's hand. When I say we need to make an action tonight, as we did with the community garden, we're going to continue that to the next meeting. We can do the same thing for the seniors and the food pantry. I just want to make sure that we're not stalling out with any of this momentum that we're trying to build to get support through the community and really get things done down there, because that's our ultimate goal, is to really get things done down there. Okay, that's me off my soapbox.
One other thing, maybe not really a question to be answered right now, but something to be thought of is, I'm sure there's a lot of old desks, chairs, furniture in all of those buildings, and consideration needs to be made of who's going to take it away. Is that a town responsibility? I'm not sure we would want to put that onto the food pantry or the senior committee. So I guess just not really an answerable question, just something to consider as we go through the process of allowing use at some point in the future.
Okay, does anybody else have any further comment on senior center and food pantry? And as we said, we'll continue this item until the next meeting. Okay. Ms. Staples has noted that all of the buildings I've ever been in at Halliwell have been moldy and musty. Many of us have said we took our kids out for a reason. This all seems really hasty, due diligence. So yes, I think we're in agreement that we will be doing our due diligence to make sure that these buildings are safe when we deem appropriate.
I think that's one of the things, one of the topics we've been talking about, right? Making sure that we have a good baseline of where we're at and where we want to go. So I'm sure that's a big part of our consideration. Just a thought, Jeff, maybe if we can't get the opportunity to, without, certainly we don't want to violate any open meetings laws, if there could be an opportunity for maybe on a Saturday to schedule a couple of people for an hour to have access. I'd certainly like to have access to the buildings, and you know, we've got 9 people here on the board. Maybe we could do 3, 3, and 3, 8, 9, 10 o'clock in the morning, something like that.
Yep.
Right, where we can provide access and give us the time to walk through and determine for ourselves, as well as, you know, the paid consultant we're going to have, exactly where we are.
All right, so for our next item, agenda item number 7, for this discussion, consideration, and action for future use, programming, exercise, and how to gather community input. I was fortunate enough to receive some materials from Melissa Flaherty, which I had since forwarded along to the committee in regards to gathering community input. They were not easy, they were not short reads. And there is a lot of information that was put into that. And still, you know, I find myself reading them a couple times, a few times over to make sure that I'm getting and absorbing quite a bit. So one of the things that I wanted to kind of start to get the wheels turning in everyone's head is, how does this committee, and I'm really going to say there are no wrong answers with this, how is this committee going to be looking to the community to gather input? It's really difficult right now based on pandemic. Pre-pandemic, we could really easily have open forums, town hall meetings. We could go to the high school, we could fill the auditorium very, very easily. We could have a meeting down at the Halliwell gymnasium, as we did a year and a couple months ago. So I'm just wanted to put it out to the board to kind of start to think, how can we effectively gather community input to make sure that, 1, we're hearing everybody, but 2, to make sure that there's no one's feeling excluded. And really, I find in my line of work, sometimes there's folks that are louder than others, and the loud ones sometimes drown out the quiet ones. And in my experience, especially doing some libraries, the quieter ones actually have the better ideas. So I don't want to, I want to make sure that no one feels uncomfortable coming to this board with their idea that they might have. I have my thoughts. I know we're certainly going to be leaning on Weston and Sampson for guidance. They, as you guys know, that part of their contract is helping us with the community gathering session. So we'll likely be looking to them for help for probably the very first one, to kind of guide us through the process, help us do that. But then I was also looking at, you know, the ability to have message boards, use Google Forms, we can do surveys in that fashion. With pandemic times, we could have limited groups based on numbers. So I'm not sure what the current number is for gathering size, but we could have limited groups with signups. We could do something like that. And I also want to make sure that we are using the best collection methods, so nothing is dropped through the cracks. And as I said, this group is going to be analyzing a lot of information that comes into the community. We have a population of 18,000, 19,000 people. And I think that's my last check. maybe 13, 14, whatever the number is. Whatever the number is, there's a lot of people that have a stake in this game. So to make sure that and it's not just the adults. I want to make sure we hear from the kids because they're likely going to be using it for a longer time than we are. If they're anything like my family kind of black. So, and I'm the 6th generation here. So, we have a lot of folks that have stake in this. So I'm going to stop talking now and I'm going to open it up to everyone to see what their ideas, what their thoughts might be to gather some of this information. Mr. Burton.
Would it be worth considering possibility of hosting a meeting on site, outside, and inviting the community? And set it up as, I mean, you know, soon, the weather's getting nice, right? Set it up in the parking lot, if we can get some chairs put out for us, or help people to bring chairs and set up as a big part of the forum to have public comment. I mean, it'd be a great way to kick off the direction we want to go and finding out where everybody else wants us to go. So if we could host a meeting outside and not have to worry about confined spaces and distance appropriately. I'm fortunate to be fully vaccinated, not everybody else is. So we're gonna have to deal with that for quite some time. If we get lucky and have a great day and can schedule a meeting outside and tell people it's gonna be open mic, right? You get an opportunity to come up and talk and we'll dedicate a lot of the time to getting that done. I'd love to see us go in that direction.
I think that's a very good idea. What I think we should do though, is we should have an idea. Well, there's 8, 9 of us here, and we have friends and we talk to them about things. I think we should have the overall thinking of how we're thinking we're gonna go, and let them know what we're thinking to do, whether it be the senior center, the community garden, the food pantry, ball fields, whatever. And then here's some of the thoughts we're thinking about. What else would you like to add or comment on? As opposed to just, what do you want to do? I think we should tell them what plans we sort of have come up with. We should give them an idea, a pattern.
That's the idea. I also think that we probably need more than just one session too.
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah, this is by no means a one and done type of deal. This is going to be a 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe 9, 10 meetings that we have. And then at that point, you know, once we get deeper into the weeds of this, we might be starting to form focus groups. We might have to be reaching out to, you know, the Parks and Rec Board, the Commission, the Senior Citizens Group, and talk to Mike St. Jean, the superintendent up at the school, get to see if he's got a good idea of some kids that want to be participating in this sort of effort, or which classrooms, you know, have a good range of thoughts and ideas that we can, you know, speak to and get some ideas from as well. So yeah, by no means is this we had the one meeting last year. It was a good start, and unfortunately we lost a lot of that momentum, but now we're picking it up and we really want to get that moving again.
As you can say, I like what Bob said. You know, about kind of giving them an overview first before it's kind of like a free for all. You know, one way that I envision being able to do that is possibly once we move forward with Weston and Sampson contract, maybe we invite them to that forum and kind of start it off where they just, you know, kind of explain things in layman's terms so that people understand, hey, here's the scope of what we're trying to accomplish. And, you know, then we can step in and say, hey, here's our objective, here's what we're trying to do firsthand. And now let's open it up to, different age groups. And, obviously, so it's not an open mic. Maybe we have them submit their questions, the person, and just have that person read off the question, beforehand, just so we don't have people consistently coming up to the mic or whatever. But I mean, we could gather people. I mean, I kind of picture if we're doing it outside, maybe we have it, the meeting at 7, and maybe we have food trucks there from 5 to 7. People are getting there early, they're socializing, and then we're able to go right into the meeting. Just an idea.
You had any food trucks.
Does anybody else have anything else to do? Sure. Yes, Mr. Halliwell.
I know, upfront you said, how are we gonna collect these ideas from the community? And I know we have a few members from the community here online. Zoom. We asked them, well, we have, if there's anybody who has ideas in terms of how we should solicit ideas. I know we've had some great ideas here, but it's something that somebody who's on the screen or on the phone has that we haven't thought of.
Any takers on the Zoom call? If you can, try to use the raise hand function. If not,
I was getting feedback on that particular line. I muted him. So I don't know. Oh, hold on one second.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
yes, who is this?
Hey, sorry. So I'm driving. I got you guys on speaker. This is too important to miss, so I wanted to add my comments here.
Oh, for those that are listening to the Zoom, this is Mr. Simpkins. He had to excuse himself, but he has since called in. Thank you, Chris.
Sorry. So, yeah, if you look at the materials that Mrs. Flaherty sent, and I had done my own research and found similar guides, North Smithfield is not the first town to have this kind of process. It's a bit unique right now because of the pandemic, but there are pretty well-established frameworks for engaging with the community around, these type of projects. It's good that we're discussing how we might go about that, but it also feels a little bit like putting the cart before the horse because we haven't really fully identified all of the stakeholders in this process. And I mean, we can, you kind of brainstorm it right now and think of a number of them, like, we've got to talk to seniors, we've got to capture the feedback from the youth, local business leaders, town organizations, municipal departments. There are so many people that have a stake in this project, and the process for getting feedback from them on what they, concerns they might have, what they might want to do with the site, it's going to vary from stakeholder to stakeholder and group to group. So I think, maybe a good first step for us and a kind of a structured way to approach this is at the next meeting, and that gives us some time to think about this, is to have a workshop where we're actually trying to identify all of those different groups that we want to make sure that we talk to. Just coming up with a list, because each one is going to be a little bit different in how we approach them, and kind of, make sure that we're fairly hearing from everyone. Having on-site meetings is great, and certainly something that we want to do, but people who, certain groups might not be able to do that or might not have an interest in doing that. I think the first step is just making sure that we know who we're even trying to talk to. And I think, a good brainstorming session between the entire committee would be a great first step there.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Simpkins. And thank you for your dedication in calling in.
Thanks.
Yes.
And this is Bob May, are you there? And Lily? are you
Yeah,
there?
yes, I'm still here.
I was
Yes.
just thinking about that, we're talking about different groups. Something to consider, why don't you check with the Boy Scouts and see if the Boy Scout is an Eagle project? Because that community garden might be a great Eagle project, and that way you get them involved, and you get a kid involved who focus on that for you for the whole summer. Just a thought.
Well, I'm kind of glad you said that because when Chris was talking about stakeholders,
Yeah.
I was kind of thinking we have a tendency to silo people and put them into groups. And I'm hoping that some of the things that we look at, like the community garden, I don't know, knitting groups, whatever, that we don't silo people too much, that maybe they can be intergenerational activities, family activities, families and single people activities. So I agree we need to know who our stakeholders are, but I'm hoping that we'll look at them as just people who want to be part of a community.
Yeah, well, both PAC 7 and Troop 1139 are both pretty healthy right now. And you get a new Girl Scout boy BSA organization that started up also. So there's three that I can think of here in the community, the scouting program, that might want to jump on that as a possibility for summer project.
Okay, I will check into that. Thank you, Bob.
Hey, Ann, this is Frank, and I think you also have kids who need volunteer service hours for like junior, National Junior Honor Society as well. So it's free labor.
Oh, free labor. I love it.
You tell me when to drop my kids off.
I'd love to have your kids in the garden.
Yes, Mr. Gardner.
I think we already have a ready-made focus group or multiple focus groups, I think, with the formalized committees here in town. And I know as part of the Charter Review Commission process, we had everybody in and spoke with them and asked them what they felt was important and to look at various portions of the charter and weigh in on what they thought about where we're at. Without maybe having the opportunity to have them physically in to join us for a meeting, maybe we could put together a request to Parks and Rec, to the seniors group, asking them to respond via email and give us some focus, some guidance right off the bat on what they might find is important to them. So we could have documentation regarding, this is what the Parks and Rec group feels is important. This is what the seniors feel is important. All the way down, we've got a ready-made clientele, if you wish, of formalized groups here in town that meet regularly and could probably put that together in short order and help guide us.
Yeah, just to go on what Tony was saying, Dan, this year, we had so many applicants that applied for open positions all over the place. We even, town council, we even expanded to have more member seats on several of the committees. And so what that kind of tells me is that people are ready and willing to step up and help. A, you just need to ask, and B, you just need to make them feel like they have a voice.
To go off of what Tony was just saying, that's a great idea to bring them in, and what Bob had mentioned about the Boy Scouts and the Cub Scouts. I think we all, through our involvement in town, know various groups that could have a voice in this. And I think at this point, until we get something from Weston and Sampson that outlines what can be done at that property, it seems like sky is the limit, I guess, at this point, where no idea is a crazy idea until we get the facts back from the engineers starting to eliminate certain things. So the more groups that we can touch base with and get their input, that we don't know what their needs are, but by hearing from them, we'll know what their needs are. So we all kind of touch back on who we've interacted with in the community, and when we are ready to have an in-person meeting, reach out to them and let them know, hey, it'd be really important if you showed up. A member of your organization, a member of your group is present and can vocalize something would really mean a lot to us.
And I think that is a great starting point. Reaching out to all these committees in various groups that are in town. I want to make sure that we're not excluding those folks that are not part of these groups. The underrepresented, underrepresented, because there are some folks that don't feel comfortable going to these meetings, like planning board, folks don't, we might get written comments because they don't feel comfortable coming to speak during the informational sessions that we have. So while I'm in full agreement with everybody, I just want to make sure that we're not giving the impression that we're excluding anyone because they're not part of the Parks and Rec Commission or the Smithfield Heritage Association or the Historical Commission. So I just wanted to bring that forward as well, because there are inevitably people that are not going to feel comfortable, but they are still going to be a stakeholder in this. This is going to be their community center as well. So I think that's a great starting point, because then that way we start to build some consensus, and then we can really start to build that framework into something that's real.
Is it possible to send out like a townwide letter, a mailer, or a questionnaire, so that we ensure everyone that lives here gets an opportunity to present their ideas? Is that a possibility?
I think so. I was talking with Chris about this earlier. Sending out a mailer is great, but there's a budget issue, and this committee doesn't have a budget. So I would certainly be more than happy to go in front of town council and ask for a budget, but they're going to need to know what number we're going to be asking for. So yeah, mailers are certainly something that I think would be great. We just need to start figuring out cost and then being able to ask the council for a budget to get that moving.
Jeff, what if we came up with like a, I know there's a weekly town newsletter that the town administrators send out. What if we came up with like almost like a virtual suggestion box? So basically, it's just a group email for us.
Yep.
And anybody can email their ideas.
Yeah, I've been exploring some uses of Google Forms. So it could probably be something that we talk more about, probably at our next meeting, but really narrowing in like age, how old you are, like just some basic demographic questions so you get an idea of who the suggestions are coming from. And I don't want to like drill down to like, are you married with 2 kids? Are you married with 3 kids? Are you single? Are you a professional? That sort of thing. But I think if we can get at least an age range on that, what age bracket, how you fill out a typical survey online, what age bracket do you fall under? Okay, what's your pie in the sky dream for what's down here? And then we can start doing keyword searches, which I think would be really helpful.
And then secondly, what do you made the point earlier about, sometimes the best ideas come from the quiet voices, but also sometimes the best ideas come from people who aren't staring at a problem or looking at something in front of them. Somebody mentioned the kids in town earlier, right? Is there a way or an opportunity to talk to Mr. St. Jean about maybe putting a school-wide, all ages class project for the end of the year, and where every student submits what you think would be the best idea of use of that property, see what the kids, they're the ones who spend more time.
Yeah, just add that too. I mean, we're also talking about a survey. I mean, we can also go to them, go to the superintendent, or whether we go through the school committee and find out if they can send out on behalf of the Halliwell committee a survey to the parents. And they send them out all the time. Because they know the demographics of the kids, and maybe rephrase some questions in the surveys that are directed to the parents, but having them ask their kids, those specific questions as well, in addition to what you said.
Okay. So I'm thinking that we'll continue this agenda item. and maybe we can start to formulate some more specifics, questions that we want to ask, what groups we want to be reaching out to, and kind of begin to think about formalizing the process for us to have that reach out. So for item number 8, unless anybody else has anything else to talk about for gathering. Okay. So for agenda item number 8, discussion, consideration, and action, having a public question and answer portion for upcoming meetings. Now, this is something that was bouncing around in my head. What I don't want this to turn into is the dedicated meetings that we're going to have for gathering information. This would be more of a 10 to 15 minute Q&A session for the public to come, ask us questions about process, ask us questions about assessments that Weston and Sampson have provided. And my main intention is that it's not a gathering session, because we're going to have dedicated information gathering sessions already. So it's just more of an opportunity for somebody to come and say, hey, I saw in the last week's article on the Halliwell Review Committee, you guys talking about tearing down item number 5. Can you explain why you think tearing down building number 5 is a good idea? And then we can direct them, have the ability to, explain what the assessment says and kind of be as transparent as possible with some of our decision making. And my intention is to say, and be as open as possible, and also say, if we don't have an answer that night, we'll come back to you and give you an answer. I don't want there to be any question about what's going on. I want to make sure that everyone is clear about our direction, about what we're doing. And ultimately, it gives us the ability for the public to ask their questions and feel confident in us as a committee that we're making the right decisions for the community. And then also be able to gain the support of the community to build what we need to build. Because if someone has an inkling of a doubt, then there's not going to be the support that we might be looking for to move things forward. So it's, again, as I said, just a 10 to 15 minute portion at the beginning of our meetings, similar to what the town council does. Have the ability for somebody to ask us a question. If we have the answer, we give them the answer. If not, we'll just come back and say, we don't have an answer at this time, but we can certainly find out for you. So that was just my thought. I wanted to get everybody else's thoughts on that, because this is obviously going to be a very heavily publicly watched group. And as I said, I don't want there to be any doubts in our abilities moving forward.
Jeff, basically just saying it's good and well for you in every meeting for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can just add that to the agenda. We'll do it. I think it's a good idea.
Okay.
And I think it should be limited though. It should be good and well for 10 minutes. It should be, if they want to come and talk to us, get yourself put on the agenda, come and speak to us about a specific thing. But it's just a general question. Very good idea.
I think also one of the other things that we can do ahead of time, again, going back to the Weston and Sampson contract, is we'll be able to know well ahead of time when those allotted public forums are going to be. So that's even something as well that we can address, where if it's outside of the scope of the 10 minutes, we can direct them to whatever date that forum is going to be.
Yep. Okay. Does anybody else have any other questions or comments or thoughts? So then I think moving forward with this, in our next couple meetings, we'll make sure that we include that good and welfare portion. All right. I'm going to kind of breeze through these last two items. We have project timeline and milestones and scheduling the future walkthrough dates. I think we'll probably want to come back to the project timeline once we get a consultant on board and be able to really identify what our schedule is going to be, aligning with what Weston and Sampson think is going to be an appropriate time for them to complete certain scopes of work. It sounds like that's kind of been the general consensus throughout our conversations this evening. Is that fair to say? And then the scheduling of future walkthrough dates. This is one of those things where I want to also make sure that we are playing by the rules for the Open Meetings Act, and we don't have forums or anything like that. If in fact we do feel like we're going to have a public walkthrough similar to what they did last year, which I think was very helpful, the town council and the town administrator held I can't remember if they actually held a formal meeting, but it was publicly advertised to just have people come and walk through the buildings. And then we get back to the part where the building is safe for us to walk through right now too. So we kind of have yeah. So I think scheduling the future walkthrough dates will probably come after our next meeting as well, because then at least at that point we'll hopefully have Weston and Sampson on board. If they'd like to participate and be there to kind of at least point things out to us so that we can explain things to the community, to do that. So I think we'll put that, but again, we'll keep a running item of agenda things on there. So other than that, does anybody else on the committee have anything that they'd like to add on the items that we have discussed since? Okay. Well, thank you all for participating this evening. Thank you to those who have been listening in on Zoom. We appreciate your attendance. And our next meeting, as I said, will be on May 6th. It will be held the same kind of forum, Zoom, and we'll be present here, and we'll go over there. So at that point, I'm going to look for a motion to adjourn.
Oh, perfect.
All right, motion to adjourn from Mr. Howell. Do we have a second? Second. Second from Mr. Mann. All in favor? Aye. Aye. All right, thank you very much, everyone. Have a pleasant night.